Montana Territory, 1872. The blizzard came without warning, a white fury that swept across the plains with such violence that Olivia Mercer feared the small cabin her husband had built with his own hands might not withstand its rage. Wind howled through every crack and crevice, finding its way between the rough-hewn logs despite the chinking she had so carefully repaired that autumn. Olivia stoked the fire in the iron stove, pushing in another precious log from her dwindling supply. At 23, she had already known more hardship than most women twice her age. The war between the states had claimed John Mercer's life at Antietam nearly a decade ago, leaving her a widow at 19 with nothing but a small homestead claim in the Montana Territory and the stubborn determination to make it on her own. 7 winters she had survived here, each one teaching her something new about perseverance. But this storm felt different, malevolent, and personal, as if nature itself had decided to test her resolve one final time. When the sound came, a faint knocking barely audible above the wind's shriek, Olivia thought at first it was just another branch breaking under the weight of snow and ice. Then it came again, unmistakably human. Her father's revolver was in her hand before she consciously thought to reach for it. Raiders, outlaws, and desperate men were as much a danger on this frontier as any winter storm. "Who's there?" she called, positioning herself away from the door, the weapon steady in her grip. "Help," came the weak reply. "Please." Something in that voice, its desperation, perhaps, or the way it faltered on the second word, moved her to action. Keeping the revolver ready, Olivia unbarred the door and was immediately assaulted by a gust of frigid air and snow. A man collapsed forward across her threshold, more ice than human. His expensive coat was inadequate against Montana's fury, crusted with frost and snow. His hat was gone, dark hair frozen in matted clumps against his head. Instinct overrode caution. Olivia dragged him inside, using strength born of years working the land alone. She barred the door against the storm once more and turned to the stranger, who now lay unconscious on her rough wooden floor. His face was handsome beneath the ice crystals forming in his beard, strong features, a straight nose, and dark brows. But more concerning was the bluish tinge to his lips and the unnatural pallor of his skin. "Frostbite," she muttered, recognizing the early signs. "And likely hypothermia." Setting aside the revolver, but keeping it within reach, Olivia set to work. She had saved livestock from winter's deadly grasp. The principles were the same for a man. First, remove the wet clothing. Then, warm the body gradually. Too quickly could shock the heart into stopping altogether. As she peeled away his frozen coat and boots, she couldn't help noticing the quality of his clothing. The stranger was no common drifter. His shirt was fine cotton, his trousers well-tailored wool. The gold watch in his vest pocket confirmed her suspicion. This man had wealth. "What brings a gentleman like you out in weather like this?" she murmured as she worked, not expecting an answer. She managed to drag him closer to the stove, wrapping him in every blanket she owned. Then she brewed strong coffee and, when his eyes finally fluttered open, helped him drink it. "Thank you," he rasped, his voice rough from the cold. "I would have died out there." "Yes," Olivia agreed plainly. "You would have." There was no room for false modesty in survival. "I'm Olivia Mercer." "Henry Grantham," he replied, his teeth still chattering. "I'm in your debt, Mrs. Mercer." She noted the formal address. "It's just Miss Mercer now. My husband died at Antietam." Something flashed in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps. "I was at Antietam, with the Union forces." Olivia stiffened slightly. John had fought for the Confederacy, a Virginia boy who'd followed his convictions north and west after their marriage, hoping to start anew far from the brewing conflict. But the war had found him anyway, calling him back to fight and die for a cause she'd never fully understood. "The war is long over, Mr. Grantham," she said finally. "And right now, your only battle is with frostbite. Let me see your hands." His fingers were white and waxy in places. She fetched a basin and filled it with lukewarm water, not hot, never hot for frostbite, and submerged his hands. Henry winced as feeling began to return, bringing pain with it. "Your husband," he began, clearly seeking neutral conversation through his discomfort. "He homesteaded this land." "We did," Olivia corrected. "Together, though I've worked it alone these past years." "Impressive," he said, and she was surprised to hear genuine admiration in his voice rather than the condescension she often encountered from men. Few women would have the courage. Few had the choice, she replied simply. The storm raged through the night. Olivia kept the fire burning, sacrificing her wood reserves for the stranger's comfort. By morning, Henry Grantham's color had improved, though he still winced when flexing his fingers. Olivia served a modest breakfast of corn cakes and the last of her preserved summer berries. Your clothes should be dry enough to travel, she said, though I wouldn't recommend it until this storm breaks. Henry studied her across the small table. You're running low on firewood. It wasn't a question. His eyes were observant, missing nothing. I have enough, she said, unwilling to acknowledge the worry that had been growing in her mind. The winter was young yet, and her supply already dwindling. Allow me to help, he offered, rising to his feet. It's the least I can do. Before she could protest, Henry had donned his coat and was out the door. Moments later, she heard the rhythmic sound of an axe against wood. He was splitting the logs she had stacked against the cabin wall, logs too large for her stove that she had planned to tackle once the weather improved. Through the frosted window, Olivia watched him work. Despite his fine clothes and soft hands, Henry Grantham wielded the axe with practiced efficiency. She wondered again what had brought him to her doorstep. When he returned, arms laden with newly split wood, his face was flushed with healthy exertion rather than fever. There's more where that came from, he said, stacking the pieces neatly by the stove. You've done this before, she observed. A smile touched his lips. I wasn't always a man of business, Miss Mercer. And what business brings you to nowhere in the middle of a blizzard, Mr. Grantham? His smile faded. I was inspecting property. My driver and wagon were caught in the storm about 2 miles back. The horses spooked, overturning the wagon. My driver was injured, and I went for help. Olivia's eyes widened. There's another man out in this storm? Why didn't you say so? No need for alarm, Henry assured her. I managed to get him to the Gardner place before continuing on. Their lights were visible through the snow. They're caring for him, but I became disoriented trying to reach the next homestead. The Gardners, Olivia nodded. Good people, though she wondered why Henry hadn't simply stayed there himself. As if reading her thoughts, he added, they didn't have room for both of us. Mr. Gardner said there was another homestead about a mile east. Yours, apparently. I thought I could make it easily. A dangerous misjudgment, Olivia said. One that nearly cost you your life. The prairie's treacherous even in good weather. A lesson I won't soon forget. He flexed his fingers, wincing slightly. Though the price could have been much higher without your intervention. The storm continued through that day and into the next. Confined together in the small cabin, they had little choice but to become acquainted. Henry proved himself useful, taking over the heavier chores without being asked. When not working, he entertained her with stories of his travels across the country, careful never to mention his precise business or the extent of his holdings. For her part, Olivia found herself speaking more in those 2 days than she had in months. Living alone had made her taciturn, but something about Henry Grantham drew her out. Perhaps it was his attentiveness, the way he listened as if every word she spoke had value. Or perhaps it was simply the novelty of companionship after so much solitude. On the 3rd morning, the storm finally broke. Brilliant sunshine reflecting off pristine snow transformed the landscape into a blinding white expanse. The temperature remained bitterly cold, but the killing wind had died. I should check on my driver, Henry said, gazing out the window. And send word to my associates that I'm alive. They'll be searching once the road's clear. Olivia felt an unexpected pang at the thought of his departure. 3 days was hardly enough to form an attachment, she told herself sternly. Yet watching him prepare to leave, she recognized the feeling settling in her chest for what it was, loneliness anticipating its return. Take my spare coat, she offered. It was John's. It will be warmer than yours. Henry hesitated. I couldn't. You can and you will, Olivia interrupted firmly. It does no one any good hanging on that peg. Besides, you can return it. The implication that they would meet again hung between them. I will, he promised, accepting the heavy wool coat. It fit him well, John having been a tall man like Henry. And I'll repay your kindness properly. There's no debt between neighbors in Montana, she said, though they both knew he was no neighbor of hers. He paused at the door. I've enjoyed our conversations, Miss Mercer. They've been illuminating. As have I, Mr. Grantham. He seemed about to say more, then thought better of it. With the tip of his hat, recovered from under a snowdrift the previous day, he was gone, trudging through knee-deep snow toward the gardener's distant homestead. Olivia watched until he disappeared over the rise, then turned back to her empty cabin, suddenly aware of how silent it was without him. 3 weeks passed. The bitter cold eased into the more moderate temperatures of late winter. Olivia stretched her wood supply, grateful for the extra cords Henry had split during his stay. She told herself she wasn't disappointed that he hadn't returned, but the lie felt hollow even to her own ears. Then, one clear afternoon, she spotted riders approaching, 3 men on horseback, leading a wagon. Her hand went instinctively to the revolver at her hip as she stepped onto the porch to meet them. Relief and something warmer flooded through her when she recognized the figure on the lead horse. "Miss Mercer," Henry called, dismounting with easy grace. He looked different now, clean-shaven, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his clothing impeccable despite the journey. This was Henry Grantham as he was meant to be seen, she realized, a man of authority and means. "Mr. Grantham," she acknowledged, suddenly conscious of her worn dress and work-roughened hands. "I see you've recovered fully. Thanks entirely to your care," he smiled, removing his hat. "I've come to return your husband's coat, as promised, and to bring a few things by way of thanks." He gestured to the wagon, which Olivia now saw was laden with supplies, cords of split wood, sacks of flour and sugar, coffee beans, preserved meats, and other provisions that would see her comfortably through until spring. Pride warred with practicality. "This is far too much. It's hardly enough," Henry countered. "You saved my life, Miss Mercer." The men with him, ranch hands, by their dress, began unloading the supplies without waiting for her permission. Olivia recognized the futility of protesting further. "At least come inside where it's warm," she offered instead. "I've just made coffee." Henry nodded to his men to continue their work, then followed her into the cabin. Inside, he seemed larger than she remembered, his presence filling the small space. He handed her a folded packet of papers he'd been carrying inside his coat. "What's this?" she asked. "The deed to your land," he replied, "and a few adjacent parcels that I thought might interest you." Olivia stared at him in confusion. "I don't understand. I already hold the deed to my homestead." Henry looked uncomfortable for the first time since she'd met him. "When I was inspecting property that day, it was this property, among others. I own the Montana Land Development Company." Understanding dawned slowly. "The company that's been buying up homesteads throughout the territory." Her voice hardened. "The company that's been pressuring settlers to sell." "Yes," he admitted, "though I prefer to think of it as offering fair market value to struggling homesteaders." Olivia's eyes flashed. "Fair? Is that what you call it when families who've worked this land for years are forced to sell because you've arranged for the railroad to bypass their shipping points? Or when water rights mysteriously transfer to your holdings?" Henry looked genuinely surprised. "Is that what's been happening?" "Don't pretend ignorance, Mr. Grantham. Your company has acquired nearly every ranch in 3 counties through such tactics. It's been the talk of the territory for months." He set his hat down and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from his recovery. "Miss Mercer, I've been in Chicago and New York securing financing for most of that time. The local operations have been managed by my partner, Edward Vance." The name was familiar, a slick-talking businessman who had visited her twice, offering to buy her land for less than half its value. Mr. Vance made it clear that refusing to sell would result in difficulties, she said coldly. Henry's expression darkened. "I was unaware of his methods. I assure you, they don't reflect my intentions or business ethics. And I should believe you because I'm giving you back your deed, free and clear," he said simply, "along with the adjacent properties that Vance apparently pressured your neighbors into selling. All signed over to you, with no strings attached." Olivia's hands trembled as she unfolded the documents. There it was in black and white. Her original 160 acres, plus the Miller place to the east and the Johnson farm to the north, over 600 acres in total. The transfer was dated 3 days prior and bore Henry's bold signature. "Why would you do this?" she asked, suspicion warring with hope. Henry moved toward the window, looking out at the men unloading supplies. "When I was recovering here, listening to you speak about this land, the way you described the spring runoff patterns, the soil composition, the native grasses, I realized something. You understand this territory better than any surveyor or land agent I've hired. He turned back to face her. I came to Montana to build something lasting, not to drive good people from their homes. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that vision. You reminded me. Olivia studied his face, searching for deception and finding none. And what happens to your business plans now? They adapt, he said simply. I still own considerable holdings in the territory. But rather than consolidation, perhaps the future lies in cooperation. Fair contracts with established homesteaders who know the land. Shared resources. Mutual benefit. It was a lovely vision, but Olivia had grown too practical for easy dreams. Your partner may not share this new perspective. Former partner, Henry corrected. I dissolved our arrangement yesterday. Vance is returning east on today's stage. Olivia found herself at a loss for words. The documents in her hand represented security she had never dared hope for. Enough land to build a truly viable ranch, not merely a subsistence homestead. I don't know what to say, she admitted finally. Say you'll consider another proposal, Henry replied, his voice lower now, more personal. I came back for more than just business, Olivia. The use of her given name sent a warm shiver through her. During those days in your cabin, he continued, something changed for me. I found myself thinking of you constantly after I left. Your courage, your intelligence, your resilience. I'd like permission to call on you properly. Olivia blinked in surprise. You own half the territory, Mr. Grantham. You could have any woman in Montana. Henry, he corrected gently. And I don't want any woman in Montana. I want the one who saved a stranger's life and then challenged him to be a better man. A slow smile spread across her face. Well then, Henry, I believe I could permit a proper call. Perhaps for supper next Sunday. His answering smile transformed his face, erasing the businessman and revealing the man she had come to know during the blizzard. I would be honored. Spring came early that year, bringing with it new growth and possibilities. Henry called regularly, riding out to Olivia's homestead every Sunday without fail. Each visit deepened their connection as they discovered shared values beneath their different backgrounds. Henry spoke of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his time at university, and his service in the Union Army, including the Battle of Antietam, where he had been a young lieutenant. Olivia shared stories of her Virginia upbringing, her whirlwind romance with John, and their journey west in search of a fresh start. We were so young, she reflected one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. Barely 20, both of us. Full of dreams and so ignorant of what homesteading truly meant. Henry covered her hand with his. You've honored those dreams. This land thrives under your care. She leaned against his shoulder, a familiarity that had developed naturally between them. It will thrive even more now. The additional acreage means I can increase the herd substantially. Our cattle drive leaves for Chicago in 3 weeks, Henry mentioned. If you're interested, your stock could join ours. Better prices than you'd get locally. Olivia appreciated that he'd phrased it as a business opportunity rather than charity. Over the past months, Henry had been careful to treat her as an equal partner in their growing relationship, respecting her independence even as he courted her. I would appreciate that, she said, though I insist on paying the proper drover's fees. Henry chuckled. I would expect nothing less. As twilight deepened into night, Henry reluctantly rose to leave. Before mounting his horse, he turned to her with unusual seriousness. I'll be in Helena for the next 2 weeks on business, he said. But when I return, Olivia, there's something important I wish to discuss with you. Her heart quickened at his tone. Is everything all right? More than all right, he assured her, taking her hands in his. But it deserves a proper conversation, not a hasty goodbye. She nodded, trying not to let her imagination run wild. I'll be here. Henry's business in Helena took longer than anticipated. 3 weeks passed without word, and Olivia tried to focus on spring planting rather than worry. She had just finished setting out seedlings in her kitchen garden when she heard the now familiar sound of hoofbeats approaching. Henry dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, striding toward her with purpose. His clothes were travel-stained, his face weary but determined. I apologize for the delay, he began without preamble. There were complications with the territorial legislature that required my attention. Is everything resolved? She asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Yes, he smiled. Which brings me to what I wanted to discuss. He took a deep breath. Olivia, when I first came to Montana, it was with the intention of building an empire. Land, cattle, influence. These were the measures of success I understood. He took her soil-stained hands in his. But during that blizzard, while you nursed me back to health in this cabin, I glimpsed something more valuable. A partnership. A shared life. Love. Olivia's breath caught as Henry lowered himself to one knee before her, there in the freshly turned earth of her garden. I love you, Olivia Mercer, he said, his voice steady and sure. Your strength, your wisdom, your kindness. I love the way you know every inch of this land and the way you fight for what's yours. I love that you saved my life and then showed me how to live it better. From his pocket, he withdrew a small ring, a perfect diamond set in gold, elegant but not ostentatious. I don't want to build an empire anymore, he continued. I want to build a life. With you. Will you marry me? Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes. 7 years she had lived alone, convinced that love and companionship were luxuries she would never again experience. Yet here was this man, wealthy and powerful by any measure, kneeling in her garden soil, offering her his heart. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Henry. I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her, a kiss that tasted of promise and spring and new beginnings. There's one more thing, Henry said when they finally parted. Something I arranged in Helena. From inside his coat, he produced another document. What is this? Olivia asked, unfolding it carefully. A marriage settlement, he explained. It establishes that all your property remains solely yours after our marriage. Your land, your cattle, your decisions. I'll advise if you wish it, but your independence is guaranteed by law. Olivia stared at him in astonishment. Such arrangements were rare, especially in the territories where women's property typically transferred to their husbands upon marriage. You would do this? She asked. Legally limit your own rights. Henry smiled. I have enough land, Olivia. What I want is a wife, not additional holdings. Besides, his eyes twinkled, I suspect we'll make better decisions together than either of us would alone. They were married that June, in a simple ceremony attended by neighbors for miles around. The territorial governor himself performed the service, a testament to Henry's influence and the respect he commanded. To everyone's surprise, including Henry's, Olivia opted to keep the small cabin as their primary residence, though Henry insisted on certain improvements, a proper bedroom addition, glass windows rather than oiled paper, and a kitchen large enough for Olivia's ambitious garden harvests. We can build a mansion later if you decide you want one, he told her as they surveyed the renovation plans. But this place has good bones and better memories. It's where we began, she agreed, squeezing his hand. Where a freezing stranger became the love of my life. In time, the Grantham holdings became the most prosperous in the territory, not through acquisitive expansion, but through innovation and partnership with neighboring ranchers. The Montana Land Development Company transformed from a symbol of Eastern money and power into a collaborative enterprise that helped stabilize the volatile cattle market for all producers. Henry and Olivia's wedding ring became a symbol of their partnership in all things. Henry brought financial acumen and connections to Eastern markets. Olivia contributed unparalleled knowledge of the land and livestock. Together, they weathered drought years and market crashes that ruined other operations, always emerging stronger. 3 years after their marriage, Olivia gave birth to twins, a boy and girl who grew up riding the range alongside their parents, learning both Henry's business sense and Olivia's practical skills. As they matured, it became clear that the Grantham legacy would continue through children who understood both the boardroom and the branding pen. On cold winter nights, when the wind howled around their expanded cabin, for they had indeed chosen to keep it rather than build the grand house Henry could easily have afforded, they would often reminisce about the blizzard that had brought them together. I still can't believe you dragged me in all by yourself, Henry would marvel, stroking his wife's hair as they lay before the fireplace. I still can't believe you didn't tell me you owned every ranch in Montana, Olivia would tease back. Not every ranch, he would correct her with a grin. There was this stubborn widow with the best piece of land in the territory who refused to sell. Thank goodness for that, Olivia would say, nestling closer. Or you might never have found your way to my door. And as the Montana winter raged outside, They would fall asleep secure in the knowledge that the greatest fortune either had found had nothing to do with land or cattle or wealth, but with the unexpected love that had begun when a young widow fed a freezing stranger, not knowing he owned every ranch in Montana.